and get started. The first thing on the agenda is the minutes. Is there a motion?
Yeah, I'll put forward a motion to accept the minutes.
Is there a second?
Yeah, second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Yeah, I have one clarification in this section on home energy scores, 5.4, clean buildings, home energy scores. It says all commissioners be aware that HES Group, Kaplan, Brown, Graham generally agreed that CPC should continue to explore. I think actually what we were looking for was direction from the commission that we should do that. So it's not that we,
Yeah.
I think it's understandable. I don't think it matters very much because I think the impact is the same, but just thought I should clarify that. So I'm not asking for a change, just.
Well, I do go to council in other places, so.
Yeah, should we change it then?
If you could send me a change by email, Bob.
Yeah, okay.
Then Mary and I will straighten it out.
Okay.
Anything else?
Nope.
Okay. All in favor? Seeing from Brian.
I'm just going to abstain because I wasn't at that meeting.
Yeah, unfortunately, the rules require you to vote unless you have a conflict.
Oh, okay, then I'll approve the minutes.
Thank you. And Chris is for. Great, it's unanimous. Our next meeting will be February 10th. Staff update. Mary, do you want to introduce yourself and such?
Good afternoon. My name is Mary McClary, and I provide support for Ashland Electric Department, Information Technology, and Ashland Fiber Network. So we're in the building behind the police station. As you may be aware, Stu is resigning, taking another position, and they have not filled this position yet. So I'm just here to fill in as best I can for you guys, take notes, and try to do those minutes. I'm working with Richard on all of this. It's my first time doing the Zoom, so we had took quite some time to get everything on the web, but we'll get it straight. And I just wanted to introduce myself. Nice to meet you all.
And thank you, Mary, for providing the support in Stu's absence. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah.
So if it isn't clear, a lot of the work that Stu did, Mary's not going to be doing. And so we will be waiting for a Stu replacement before that level of staff support can pick up. Mary, do you have anything to say about what the process is for replacing Stu?
Yeah, they are going to revisit the job description, and that's in Tina's hands, who is HR department. And she did tell me that Stu is going to be in contact once a week for about a month. So far, he hasn't answered my email yet. He's been on vacation till I believe the 18th. And so I still may be able to get some information from him, but the process is they review the job description, they post it, they interview, and then they hire. It should take about 1 to 1.5 months, depending how many applicants they get.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Gary?
Is there an opportunity for the Climate Policy Commission to at least be involved in that job description review?
If you have things that you want to submit for that, you can submit them to myself or Tom McBartlett, who is overseeing this department. And then we'll get that together with Tina. Sure.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Would you forward a copy of that job description to Rick and he can distribute it then?
I will.
Okay, thank you.
Brian?
Are we certain that this job is protected and not at risk for council action as a cost-saving measure?
So far as I know, this job is budgeted and it is not on anyone's radar to get rid of it. I think it's mandated. I think it's in a resolution. So it's not anywhere near, they're not going to eliminate the position.
Thanks.
Okay. Council update?
Yes. Trying to think of what has transpired since we had a conversation at the last council meeting about the water treatment facility and the city staff's efforts to get us to the gold ranking of the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure's Envision program. The council has directed staff to keep going with the efforts that they have in place, which includes putting up a 200 kilowatt system in some fashion. We've directed them essentially to do their best at figuring out what is the best way to get that system up as part of the components of reaching gold status for the Envision program. And we also accepted council's decision in terms of reducing the initial capacity a little bit in terms of the size that the water treatment facility will be initially. What else? This isn't to the council yet, but it's coming. I don't know. I know that some of you were on the call last night to look at the new development proposal for Croman Mill property. There will be a lot of climate decisions that will impact the climate in terms of how that project moves forward. We just all got the first glimpse of it last night, and I think the Planning Commission is going to be seeing a presentation from them later on this month. Is there anything else, Rick? That
LCDC?
Yes, the LCDC letter that we submitted was approved by council, so it went into the official record with the state. And I think that's all that we have from the last couple of meetings.
Okay. Ray?
Anya, when I looked at the video of that study session on the water treatment plant, it wasn't clear, has council approved continuing beyond the 60% design phase?
Yes.
I remember Scott had put that on hold.
Yeah, that's my understanding, is that that's what we were directing staff to do, is to go forward. They came and asked two specific questions. One was around the size of the capacity of the plant, and the other was around the Envision program. But they also provided some information that they hadn't been able to provide before, which is partly why they held off. And so now that that information is in front of council, it's my understanding that we have directed them to move forward to the 90% design phase.
Which will be the next checkpoint, the 90%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
As an add-on to that, I've had a number of exchanges with Scott about the PV or microgrid installation there, just to make you aware that that conversation occurred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not an easy, an easy site to be working with in terms of the 200 kilowatts. So we're trying to figure out what is the most cost-effective and smartest way to get that capacity onto the site.
Gary?
Tanya, I know that the City Council is working with SOU to develop a community assessment or priority funding system of some sort or another to gauge the public support of the city's services. I wonder how the CPC engages with that process to ensure that climate and support for climate change through a variety of potential city programs are a part of that review.
I'm glad you brought that up, Gary. We've talked at this committee about that process, and it was sort of a little bit more amorphous in the past around the community survey that's being put together. But the council has approved a contract with SOU to help us create a community-wide survey, and SOU will be running it, but they'll help us develop our questions, and they will be focused around the general fund. So we're talking about fire, police, parks, and planning primarily. We're not going to be talking about electrical service or water, wastewater, AFN, those sorts of questions won't be part of that. It's really around this question of how do we deal with the financial realities of our general fund. And so, yes, the direction that that's heading in is that we'll be asking questions to help get feedback about the priority that citizens see around different elements that are in the general fund. And then we'll also be asking them their interest level in a variety of different revenue enhancement strategies. So the point of it is to gather enough information that we have a sense of, to what extent does this community value these services? Are we willing to invest additional funding, which is what's needed? What we are absolutely sure about right now is that we have 3 of those 4 are under-resourced for what we're asking them to do. So we either need to change what we're asking them to do, or we need to find some more resources, or some combination of the 2. So that's what that process is about. One of the critical pieces of this is the effort to get people to fill it out. So they'll receive a postcard in the mail probably about 2 weeks before they get their survey that says, watch for the survey, it's coming. But it's going to be up to the city to do the public outreach and engagement process to get people to fill it out. So what we are going to be doing is asking all of the commissions, civic groups. The city will have its own public relations piece going out about it. But basically our job is to get as many people as possible to answer the survey.
One little follow-up. I know historically that climate issues have been funded from external sources, including the electric department. But I wonder, again, isn't it possible that if the citizenry saw climate change as being central to the function of local government, that too would be considered as a part of the community survey? Again, we know from work that SOCAN's done, and also from the development and support that the SEEP received upon its adoption, that there's a fairly widespread support for addressing climate change. And I know at this juncture that we aren't doing enough. We have admitted we're falling behind. The only real way to address that, short of regulation, is through incentives. And clearly the general fund could be a source for those incentives if that were a key priority among the community.
Right, and if the community was willing to invest in those sorts of programs. One of the things that we know is that there are a number of values that the community, various elements of the community have, that we're not able to move on to the extent that they want us to move on them. And so in addition to climate, it also includes homelessness, it includes affordable housing. There's a number of elements that a lot of people would like to see the city be able to take a stronger role in. And so this will come down to the questions that we ask. The build out of climate would be in the general fund. If we were going to do more than we've been doing, it's going to have to live in the general fund. And the same is true for homelessness or affordable housing work. So I think it is definitely possible for us to ask those questions. And I think that there'll come a time in the council's process where we're grappling with the questions. And I think that would be an appropriate time for the council, for this commission, or for individual members of the commission or the larger community to write in and talk to us about what are those other elements that are simply not really there at the level that the community would like to see. They're not mandated public safety, that sort of thing, but they're priorities that the community would like to have a chance to engage on and give us some feedback on. So
in some ways, the survey is a retrospective assessment of the city's services, not a prospective one.
No, I must not have communicated right. We can ask questions about prospective services too. What we know is that fire doesn't have enough people for what we're asking. Police doesn't have enough people, and Parks doesn't, because they've taken a major hit in the last budget cycle. So in addition to those questions, are these other questions around what kind of a commitment does the community want to see from the city on climate, homelessness, affordability, and there might be some others. Equity could be another one where people might want to put some investment in. So we need to make sure that the survey asks that broad range of questions. And it's going to be a process at the council to develop those questions. And so I think it's going to be important that people tell us how broad of a conversation do they want that survey to include.
Thank you.
Ray, and then we're going to need to move on fairly soon. Ray, you're muted.
This had to do more with staff and Stu. How are we going to keep track of the energy retrofit loan program? We were still waiting to understand if we were accepted or not, weren't we?
Yeah, and I'd like to defer that until the what we're going to do discussion. I've got almost an hour allocated for that.
All right, great.
Caitlin?
Thank you. I just have a follow-up question to the conversation that was just going on. So Tanya, how would be the best way to provide that feedback to ensure that questions are included on the survey related to climate?
I think it would probably be helpful for the commission to send a communication over to the council that if you all are hoping that the council includes prospective questions about some of these additional elements, I think that would make sense to send a formal communication across. And okay. We haven't structured yet the process for developing the questions, but I think we are going to have some sort of subcommittee from the council involved with that. And then I believe SOU is probably going to be interviewing the counselors themselves first as a first step. So sooner rather than later would be, I think, most effective.
Is it fair to say that if one of the commissioners wants to put a draft together for CPC for the February meeting, that would still be timely?
I believe so.
Okay, so let's keep that in our basket of things to do. Okay, anything else about the council update? Okay, I'd like to move on to other announcements. I have a number of them if no one else does. Let me just go through them. An inquiry to the city attorney was sent to Tanya, as we previously agreed, regarding CPC membership code change. And I believe, Tanya, you were going to move that forward in the new year.
Yep, this month. Yeah.
Oregon Climate Action Hub sent a request to have Ashland Climate Action presented on their website. This actually came in through the contact form that Stu normally monitors, and it's a staff thing. We're in kind of a limbo here with staff. My intent is to just mention these things during the announcements portion of CPC meetings, so that if any one of the commissioners wants to follow up and absent any staff ability to do so, they can. So my recommendation for this particular one is that basically just wait until Stu's excuse me, replacement is hired. Environment Oregon has asked to meet about a report that shows how local governments in Oregon can pave the way for cleaner transportation through tools and policies that support the growing adoption of electric vehicles. This is a bunch of tools and a lot of stuff that's very specific to the city. So once again, my recommendation is to just put this on the stack for Stu's replacement. Just today, I received a letter from Emil Amaratico, the general manager of the Ashland Food Co-op, requesting that either CPC or CCOC support their request for a banner. My intent is to put that on the February agenda for CPC. I believe they're trying to get it on there sometime in spring or towards the middle of the year or something like that. So given that I just got it, I wasn't able to get it to you folks. My intent is to defer it until the February meeting. Okay, so those are my announcements. Any others? Bob?
Yeah, it's not really an announcement, but it's a question for you, Rick, and maybe it's going to come up later in the agenda. But one of the topics that came up last time in the context of the master plan was inquiring to Tom McBartlett when he might be able to meet with us or give us some input onto the progress on the electric master plan.
Yes.
I wonder if you had that
Thanks
conversation.
for bringing that up. No, there's actually not really any, well, we might have gotten to it during our planning part, but let me just tell you what happened. I sent a email to Tom roughly a month ago, and I've heard nothing back. So that's where it is.
Okay, thanks.
I can check on that for you.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Gary?
I just wanted to let you know that the Department of Land Conservation and Development issued an updated draft of the climate-friendly rules. They're available on their webpage and are better, I think, in general, especially the issue concerning bicycle planning. So we made some progress.
Great. Any other announcements? Okay, not seeing any. Don't believe we have any public forum specific to this meeting. So let's move on to old business, formal planning update, Ray.
Okay, Tanya covered the water treatment plant study session meeting. The other thing they talked about in there was the water management and conservation plan. It was good to see that we still have a plan to update our climate study on our water supply sources. So Scott is continuing to carry that. And the other thing he mentioned as far as the TAP plan is that there's two different options in place right now. So that needs to be decided before we'll adopt the TAP master plan. And that's basically whether or not we commingle with Talent or have separate piping from them and pumping. And then you covered the electric 10-year planning study. We're waiting to hear back from Tom. And that's the only updates I had.
Okay, any questions? Brian?
Ray or Rick, on the link that's to the on the agenda to this issue, the formal planning update, there's pretty much it looks like all the city plans. And I'm wondering if you can just give guidance to me and new members. Are we supposed to be familiar with all these and read these, or are there certain ones that right now we should get up to speed on?
Well, first of all, it's meant to be a reference, Brian, so not a reading list. And I think it's, as you said, it's better to focus on the immediate ones as they come up for approval or needing input before getting approval. So that's why I try to put in some dates to say when they're going to be coming up.
Okay.
And the other thing is there are live links to the plan, so you can use that to actually, if you have some time and want to just take a look at what's there.
Yeah, so I downloaded all of them, but I'm just wondering, so it'd be best for me to see which ones in the next update column are coming up and get familiar with those.
Yeah, and I think that'll work into what our outlook is for this year as well. Part of it is driven by what we're doing, but it's mostly driven by where Public Works is on these plans and when they need updates or changes.
Okay, thank you.
And so I think it's a good idea that I could alert the council to, the commission to when those are coming up, because we should as a group be providing input as they're getting changed and updated.
Right. So the notion is that since we're to keep us all from trying to do everything, because we just don't have the capacity to do that. One of the divisions of labor was for Ray to keep track of this stuff and alert us when we might need to pay attention more broadly. Bob?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment, just because Brian raised the question. It's a terrific, each one of these plans is a terrific source of information about, the state of affairs, as of the date that it was prepared, and some of them are getting a bit old. So if you're ever interested in what's going on in a specific topic, specific sector, this is the go-to place for them. They're usually, I think, all really well done and very informative. So I encourage you to dabble whenever you have spare time.
Okay, I appreciate your comments.
Good questions.
Okay, anything else for the formal planning update? Not seeing anything. Let's move on to council study session process. I have very little time allocated to this. I don't even remember what changes I made. Just for my own use, I'm going to start using change bars if we keep updating this thing, because I can't report to you what I changed. But I believe it conforms to the comments that I received at the previous CPC meeting. I did reach out towards the end of November requesting another meeting with the mayor, which is part of this process, and did not get a response from her either. So my plan is to try again after this meeting. Okay, so now I think we're ready to move on to.
Just a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think we're continuing to use this as a guideline as we go before council for a study session, and sort of boxes to check and information that we want to provide.
That's my understanding.
Right.
And I believe we've all agreed that to what the memo says. One of the things we agreed to is that the relatively long list of information we'd like to present to council is not a requirement. It's suggestions of what we aspire to. And I think the memo now reflects that. Okay, anything else? Okay, I'd like to move on to eliminating city fossil methane infrastructure procurement.
Well, fortunately for me, I did use Word to track my changes, which you presumably could also view as you reviewed the document. One of the issues that the commission had with the earlier draft was reliance upon an Oregon Public Utility Commission document that showed that the use of fossil gas and electric air conditioning was less costly over the lifetime of the equipment as compared to a heat pump. Certainly those figures that were used in that in 2017 may have changed, but independent of the merits of that data, the commission asked that that information be struck. And instead, I've included a discussion about the process that would need to be undertaken to actually switch out a fossil gas furnace or water heater to a heat pump furnace or heat pump and a heat pump water heater, which to me, having done that in my own home, seems to be the critical kind of set of steps that we need or we should ask the city to undertake. That is to look at the age of the equipment and its forecast life and the function or capacity of the electrical panel to actually provide the electrical needs of a replacement hot water heater or cooktop or furnace, whatever it happens to be. And the table that is included in the report to you in your packet is a kind of a starting place for the development of that kind of information. The form was forwarded to Stu, who then asked Scott to take a look at it, who in turn assigned that task to the GIS and let's see, building management. I'm not sure quite.
Asset management, I think is the phrase they use.
What was that again?
Asset management.
Management. So, and that effort may take as long as 6 months. It just simply has to work its way to the top of the queue. So that information certainly isn't available now and will be available when, in fact, staff has the resources to investigate and provide the data to us. In addition to those changes, I also, in the code amendments themselves, drew from, I should say, a New York State legislative proposal that would have an opportunity for local governments, or a requirement that local governments not use fossil gas, or that I believe the legislation was statewide and prohibited future fossil gas use, except for certain specific circumstances that are specified in this draft document. As it turns out, with the amendments that I've made, the CPC option A, as it's included in our packet, and the CPC option B are the same. There are no differences. So let me just explain what the new language provides. Basically, it states that the city wouldn't install new gas infrastructure in the event that a building is remodeled and the replacement of space, water, or cooking equipment is included. Only in those cases would this ordinance apply, or in the case of a new building, such as that of Public Works, which is planned, at least as I understood it a year ago. Who knows what this, I don't know the status of that effort, but the new language that's included and again extracted out of the New York legislation is that there are a few provisions that would allow the city to in fact install gas if in fact it were demonstrated that that fuel is the only practical way to provide for the needs of the building or the process or whatever it happened to be. But in addition to allowing that, it would also require that the city include electrical capacity to serve that function in the future when and if that function can be replaced with electrification rather than fossil gas. I think importantly, the provisions explicitly preclude reliance upon cost as being the sole determinant in whether a fossil gas furnace is replaced or whether it's used in a new building. I think last meeting, the CPC had a lot of discussion about that very issue. You know, what happens if it's more costly, right? Is it still the city, is it still our preference as a commission to have that equipment replaced? And I think the answer is yes, that's exactly what needs to happen. And this new language provides, I think, direction in terms of ensuring that, yes, costs can be considered, but only in the case where it's otherwise not feasible or practical. I think the word is physically or technically infeasible. So I believe that with this language, the ordinance is somewhat more flexible, but at the same time, more definitive in terms of how and when fossil gas equipment would be replaced. And my hope is that the commission today will endorse the language and the background report that we have today and move this topic forward to a future city council study session in order to assess and have the council provide direction to the commission in terms of where the next step is. Are there questions or comments? Yeah, Ray.
I like your, the start of the table. I think that's necessary for the council to see. But we probably also need to have an example for a couple buildings of what that cost differential is going to be, not just for replacing fossil gas infrastructure, but also operating over the next 20 years, say, so that we have a cost comparison. So, because I think you said in the document, or you said here, that the upfront cost could be higher, but the operating costs in the end, of course, we'd have to predict what's going to happen to fossil gas prices and electrical prices over time.
Yeah.
So, but you know, some attempt to get an idea of, obviously, a lot of the council focus has been on dollars these days and will continue to be that way. And so you're trying to make it in some way kind of ironclad that cost isn't an excuse not to do this. And I think that's what we would like to see, but I don't think we can ignore the costs.
I think that, I guess in response to your question, Ray, I can see that point of view. And I can see the council wanting that information, right? I mean, it's only natural to want to know what the physical implications of a particular policy choice is. But I think too, before we endeavor to engage a private contractor, before we, start digging in as lay people, because I don't know who else is going to do this, and I'm certainly not qualified. I can tell you what my experience in my own home is, which is that the installation of a electric heat pump, water heater, and heat pump to cool and heat my house will take more years than I will probably be around to pay for, and yet we made that choice as a household because we're committed to the outcome that I think everyone on the commission is committed to.
Yeah, there's the undollarized effect of reduced CO2 emissions. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
So,
exactly. That's the payoff, right?
Right.
And for me, I would like to present this material to the council in an effort to see whether we have reason to begin to further investigate it. I don't know, how we're going to, we don't, as a commission, at least to my knowledge, we don't have a budget. So going out and asking a heating and air conditioning person and a plumber to give us estimates on a prospective remodel or a prospective building is at best problematic. So I think we need to acknowledge that in our discussion with the council, that we don't know what these are going to cost. We're willing to, we're happy if somebody can find those costs for us, you know, through the city's staff or through a private contractor that the city might hire. But I don't know of anyone on this commission who has that insight and knowledge. Maybe Chris could kind of share his experience with this. But again, if it's not specific to a city building, I'm not sure how well it would satisfy the council's interest in getting cost information. Chris, do you want to weigh in?
I think in terms of, you know, costs, and it's just such a fluid discussion right now on a number of levels. I think it's much easier to look at it in terms of a needs assessment of the building in question or being proposed, in what extent that infrastructure is serving a city building. And, you know, as you mentioned, Gary, I can't remember the exact verbiage you used, but if it's feasibly impossible or just does not fit the use, I mean, there's a number of I think situations where you're looking at efficiency cost and also just electrical infrastructure limitations on a, you know, large load of, and often those are in heating or cooling situations. So in terms of a needs assessment, yeah, in terms of a needs assessment, I guess it would just, I think it would have to be on a case-by-case basis.
Tanya, you wanted to.
Yeah, I wanted to just find out how this conversation links to the administrative policy that was put in place in December of 2018. It's an administrative policy, like I mentioned, on the future use of carbon emitting fuels in municipal facilities. Do you have this, Gary?
I have those, yes. And I think the difference is one, it is an administrative policy. It is not the council's policy. And I think this kind of policy warrants the council's endorsement. Additionally, I think this discussion is, or at least could be, fruitful for the community as a whole to begin to grapple with the fact that changes are essential in terms of heating and cooling in the city's residential as well as commercial buildings in order to, in fact, get to net zero. We aren't going to get there by continuing to use fossil gas in 50%, roughly 50% of the homes in Ashland. That will have to change. Clearly, this policy doesn't address that parameter, but it at least begins to serve as an education tool for the broader community to come to grips with those realities or that reality. And for that purpose alone, I think this discussion has great merit.
So just to follow up then, what you're looking for is something that is essentially this administrative policy, but risen to the level of a council policy. And are we thinking also about, you know, because the administrative policy is talking about no future installations, and that whenever we do a you know, a new building or you know, do an upgrade, that we have to be, you know, essentially dealing with this policy. So is it that, first of all, that we want it to be a council level policy? And then secondly, are we talking about essentially dismantling that infrastructure maybe ahead of the end of its useful life?
My expectation, and consistent with what I heard the commission to support at our last meeting, was that the equipment would continue to serve its functional, until it's the end of
Until
its
it's end of
functional life.
life. That's what
Um,
I thought, but I wanted to make sure that that element of it hadn't changed. Thanks.
Right. Bob?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I have a few questions, a few comments, I think. One, I think, I mean, I appreciate the insight that you've added, Gary, in the discussion section of the staff note that talks about planning. And I think that, you know, like you, I have experience at the residential level, which is not entirely applicable to the larger public space, public buildings. And it does take some work. So I guess one of the things that I would suggest is feed that whole thought process through to the actual ordinance. If it's going to be an ordinance, and I have not seen the administrative policy that Tanya referred to, but I would like the ordinance to say to direct staff to generate a plan, building by building or facility by facility, for either early retirement or succession of the natural gas equipment in that building, in order to meet our 2030 goal, as you say, of carbon neutrality. So that's 8 years, and so if each building already in advance has a plan for how it's going to replace existing gas equipment with non-gas equipment, or as you have a nice out, I think, when it's completely not feasible, you know, that can be considered and can be taken. Then that in turn can be updated as new technology and new approaches come to the fore. But I guess I'd like to see that sort of planning language in there as well, that there actually just be a plan. And I don't think it's any of us that have to do it. I don't know if that's what you were suggesting or saying that you couldn't do, and I agree with you. That just needs to be part that needs to be part of the asset manager's job, is to plan for the succession of gas equipment with something else. And then the other thing, I think maybe it's in the administrative policy that Tanya referred to, at least the way she described it. It was simple in the way that I like. I find the language in these, the language to be over cumbersome. I mean, I like the language of the title, which is eliminating city fossil gas infrastructure procurement. And I think of this as, you know, we've discussed it in several iterations. I think of this as a ban on procurement of new fossil gas equipment for the city, with the exception of those times when it's not possible. So I think this could be simplified to a single sentence or two that just says that prohibits the procurement of equipment that uses methane or natural gas for fossil gas, including for the replacement of existing equipment, and certainly not for new equipment in buildings not yet built. I think it could be a much simpler language than that. And then my last thing is, it's kind of a detail, I suppose. Chapter, you're proposing this be inserted as a general title in Chapter 4 of the municipal code, which has to do with revenue and finance, I think. And I'm a little curious about why that place versus the climate. The SEEP itself is in Chapter 10 under, I think it's under safety or health or something. There are chapters having to do with buildings that don't necessarily talk about city buildings, but talk about city buildings more generally. Eventually, if there's a prohibition on new natural gas buildings in Ashland, I would imagine it would go there. So I'm not sure why this wouldn't be placed there. So I don't know. I'm not an expert in these placement of these things.
I think your points are well taken. This draft of the city municipal code language, ultimately, if the council said to the CPC, yes, we want to move forward with this, the first step, or among the first steps, would be that this draft would go to the city attorney, and the city attorney would provide his insight and experience in terms of determining the language as well as the scope and placement in the municipal code. As you suggested, Bob, none of us are paid for any of this work. And in some cases, we don't have the needed technical grounding to say with absolute confidence that this is the way that it needs to go. I think our key thrust is to advance to the council policies that we believe are prudent for the council to adopt and would help to meet the goals as established in the SEEP. Where it goes from there is really up to the council. If they wanted to take a more proactive approach, then they would instruct the city staff to, as you suggested in your first or second point, to develop a more specific plan to address each building to ensure that the outcome as articulated in the municipal code is actually achieved. The worksheet that I prepared and the GIS and asset management folks presumably will use at this point at least, provides an outline of what that plan might look like. So, we've got some of that data forthcoming, but at this point, it's going to take a lot more work to actualize the elimination of fossil gas in city buildings. I mean, that's a process. You can write everything down on a piece of paper, and it's not going to address the details that are needed to actually do the work. But that's fundamentally what we want to see done, is the work. Were there other questions? I thought, Brian, you had one.
So now I guess I'm a little bit more confused, because I guess I don't know what it is we're now being asked to decide on. Are we deciding on this memo and this language in the draft ordinance? Are we just going to be asked to decide on a general idea and a discussion with the city council, and then possibly the city council works with the lawyer in order to draft a specific language, but we're not going to provide any suggestions for the kinds of specific language that we want? It just seems rather inefficient and circular to me.
In response to that, let me just say that what I hope we'll be able to do is agree upon the direction. If we, as a commission, need to go through the document at a finer level, then that's our prerogative, certainly. But my hope is that we can agree to begin engaging with the council on this topic using what is included in the CPC's packet as a basis for that discussion. Again, I think the draft municipal code language serves a good point of departure. It will undoubtedly be revised by the council and by the city attorney. I mean, that's the way processes work. What I think our responsibility is again to ensure that as a commission, we believe what's being advanced to the council is reasonable, prudent, and necessary to achieve the goals as set forth in the SEEP. Does that help to clarify, Bob, or did I just still talk around the issue?
I guess maybe it's clarified. I would not vote for this language, this ordinance language. I would vote against. So, because I think it's not specific or clear enough about what we want. I don't think.
I want to
I
break in
don't,
here.
don't think it does us any favors to the council to
Yeah.
put things like this that are muddy.
So I want to make a proposal for how to move forward because I feel like we're starting to go around in circles here. I believe that we have enough information to have a reasonable discussion with council for how this should go forward, including requesting that they direct staff to do the analysis that's been proposed. What I think would be useful at this point, the process document that we agreed to says that the chair is responsible for actually making the presentation to council. And so I would like for Gary and I to go offline and start developing that presentation, because I feel like that I have reached the point where I believe that we can have an effective discussion with council. But I do believe that the language needs to be simplified dramatically and presented in a different fashion. So that would be my proposal for how we should move forward with this, is for Gary and I to bring back a council presentation at the next meeting.
Rick, should this language address at all new buildings, city buildings? We're kind of focused on replacing current
We
infrastructure,
wanted to, yes.
because
It
the
does.
title would say you're not buying any more gas, fossil gas procurement. To me, that kind of includes new buildings as well.
Yes.
Yeah, clearly.
Okay.
And
Okay,
it does address.
I think it, okay,
I was just going to say that it does address new buildings as well as replacement of existing.
okay, just wanted to confirm that.
Gary, I think Brian has his hand up.
Oh, yeah, Brian, I'm sorry.
This may be too long of a required answer, but I'm just wondering, given that city operations are really a small fraction of the community's methane use and fossil fuel use for heating, cooking, et cetera, is the purpose of just restricting this to city operations to kind of serve as an example of how this can happen? Because it's only going to be a very small step towards reaching the goals of the SEEP. And I know the SEEP has a specific carve out for city operations, but
Truthfully,
to look at, new housing.
right. To the best of my knowledge, and I think the research that the commission has done to date confirms that the city's authority over anything over fossil gas consumption in any other setting than in municipal buildings themselves. The city has no legislative or land use or economic role. The state legislature hasn't delegated to the city of Ashland or to any other city the authority to prohibit natural gas extension to new residential or commercial buildings.
Is that Oregon specific? Because hasn't Berkeley done that?
It is Oregon specific, and that's why many people mistakenly think that, and again, if somebody else has a different opinion, please chime in, but that's why many people kind of are anxious for the city to move forward with this, but clearly, if that were possible, I think it would have happened in Eugene. I think it would have happened in Portland, and it hasn't. And we truthfully, I would like to see the commission, or at least members of the climate advocacy coalition, to advance legislation based upon the model used in New York, to ask the legislature to in fact authorize local governments to do what you suggest, or in fact, better yet, prohibit new fossil gas connections. I know that's a little bit beyond what we're talking about, but the scope is limited because of our legal authority.
Well, I'm going to break in here again. I feel like we're not staying focused on the topic at hand, and we're running over on this topic. I made a proposal for how we should move forward. Many of the statements that have been made just in the last little bit, I would contest and debate, and I don't think that tonight's the proper time for that. So I would like to see somebody propose, as the chair, all I can do is propose. I can't make a motion for what the next step is going to be on this. Bob?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to move that the chair and Gary, that Rick and Gary simply prepare a presentation for discussion at our next CPC meeting. That presentation would be the presentation to go to a city council study session on this issue. Is that what you were intending, Rick?
Well, that's certainly a reasonable motion. So you have made it. Is there a second?
Seconded.
It's been made and seconded. Do you want to speak to your motion, Bob?
No, I've said that the elements of this that I think are not quite ready, but I strongly support the initiative, and I think that seeing a presentation that would come that would be ready to go to the city council study session is a reasonable next step, and that would allow us to move forward. So
Okay,
I would support that.
This thing, whoever it is, do they want to speak to the motion?
Is Gary?
Gary?
No.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Andra had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Andra, please go ahead.
I just want to make sure that I'm clear. So it sounds like our intention with this is to start engaging in the process with the commission so that it's very clear that we think that the city should be engaging in an assessment of all of its buildings and structures according to their carbon footprint, and that they should engage in planning to replace equipment as it is as an end of life, but also to look at planning to take out maybe equipment that is less friendly to the carbon neutral objectives, and that we're asking the council to make that a part of their actions for the city to really engage in actively. Is that what this is going to do?
Well, I think the motion is more specific to Gary and I developing something to bring back at the next meeting. What you just said, I believe, is consistent with, is more or less consistent with what I expect the presentation to be. Gary, would you agree with that?
Yeah, we'll work it out.
Okay. And
Yes, that was a useful clarification. Thank you.
I'm in favor of the motion.
Okay. So I think we're ready to vote on this. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that's unanimous. Gary and I will get together offline and figure out how we're going to move forward. Okay, the next topic is the carbon note. Gary, you're on for that one too.
Yeah. This one, I'm hopeful the CPC can discuss and establish a threshold for when the city staff should be required to document carbon emissions from a project, program, or capital improvement. And I think the issue here is not whether the city council should be presented with that information, which I think we all agree they should. That's what the seat calls for. But really, at what threshold should that requirement be placed on staff. It isn't, I think or at least I started off in the draft of setting some sort of a monetary threshold around $500,000. I'm not sure that's the correct threshold, and hope that the CPC can have a discussion about what might be a suitable threshold, and at that juncture then forward this material or the resulting decision to the city council, asking again that they amend the city municipal code to require the staff to actually provide that information, much like the physical note is required now as a part of the municipal code. So I set out a couple options. One was basically the original one, which was having it be based upon 1% of the general fund budget. That's $582,000. So in that case, an internal combustion automobile wouldn't be included in that requirement. If they were buying 10 to 15 cars, then at that point, that might be enough to warrant a carbon note. I think that we want to set a lower target. At least that's my opinion. It could be more general that all programs, capital improvements, and projects should be subject to the carbon note, just because that's the only way the council will have the insight to know. However, if it's that expansive, there is some legitimate concern that it would overburden staff. And I think we need to be cognizant of that as we deliberate on this matter. Similarly, we could limit the carbon note only to capital improvements. That seems pretty straightforward. If you're buying a car that's a capital improvement, then it's subject to the carbon note. Or we could limit it to programs, presumably measuring them over a 5-year period, if in fact they are designed to continue over an extended period of time. Those examples are simply ones that I think might be appropriate, but again, they seem as though they're pretty blunt, and there may be some nuanced issues that the commission can identify that might help us to set a threshold for the carbon note. The carbon note, just kind of backing up a little bit, is an informational item to the council to inform them of the greenhouse gas emission impact of any future expenditure or action. And we hope as a commission that the impacts on greenhouse gas emissions would be a significant factor in their decision to approve or not, or disapprove a future program or capital improvement. I think it was interesting at the council's meeting, I guess that was a week ago Tuesday, some of the councilors asked whether the CPC had weighed in on the water treatment plant improvement, and clearly that kind of a project should have been subject, or it would have been helpful to have the carbon impact of that decision documented as a part of that decision-making process, so the council would have a clear understanding of what the implication of that is. I don't think we're talking about only water treatment plants as being subject to the carbon note. I think the threshold is much lower than that. But again, the commission needs to make that determination. Are there questions? Yeah, Brian. You're muted.
I have a comment. One, being on the original SEEP, it was clearly, and as is stated in the SEEP, a goal that all decisions by council and staff, look at the climate implications. And so I really support this. I like, there's a fiscal note required. And I have one comment in the summary of this document. In the summary section, it's called a climate note, but throughout the body of it, it's called a carbon note. And I think it'd be, personally, I like climate note better, but that was just a point of attention.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of other pollutants other than carbon that influences climate, certainly. So that rephrasing it to be a climate note probably would be appropriate.
You had a couple hands go up, Gary.
Oh, yes. Caitlin?
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, I would agree with what Brian just said. In terms of this being a climate note, and I really see this as an opportunity for the city to, establish the foundations for a climate resilient and equitable future. And, we need to institutionalize climate change management into every single decision our city makes. No fiscal limit. And, the inclusion of a climate note needs to also include adaptation and mitigation, in all the plans, programs, and budget allocations. And I think this is, perhaps one of the most important steps Ashland can take to prepare for our current and future climate-related impacts. It's not just what are the impacts on staff to do the climate note, it's what are the impacts on citizens, to make various decisions knowing the climate changes we have.
Other questions? Yeah, Ray.
I was kind of echoing what Caitlin brought up, is that the council will get this carbon or climate note and understand the emissions with the action they're taking. But then the question is what's the impact of those emissions? And you did have a section on, would this require the city to spell out from a resiliency standpoint, what's the impact on the community from these emissions? Cognizant, however, that we're breathing emissions from everywhere, or we have to live with emissions from everywhere. So is it really required for them to, or just state that the goal of this is to reduce emissions because of the impacts on the community, but not have to do a community assessment for each project on what the impact is?
For my own perspective, this is largely a disclosure and of the emissions, and I at least with the
I see it as more maybe we're keeping track of the emissions and we do everything we can to reduce the emissions on the project.
Right.
So,
go ahead and finish. I'm sorry.
So again, it's more of a tracking mechanism, that something that we're not obliged to track right now, but we should be.
Right. Yep. I think like a big project like the water treatment plant, for instance, seems like it would have been appropriate for that to be subject to a litany of evaluations.
Well, there is some wording in there to track emissions. Now, I don't know how they're going to do it, but there
I
was
was-
some wording added.
I was referring more to the construction emissions.
No, it's there for construction as well. Scott has some wording in there, but
Okay,
it's not as
good.
strong as having this carbon note, if that had been in place, I think.
Right. Good points. You know, again, I'm from, you know, falling back on the seat. It's really, I think as Ray and Brian have said, it's really tracking and documenting the emissions of city actions. And I think that's I believe that is the full scope of what is included in this, what now we'll call climate note. And it doesn't address adaptation and equity, which certainly it could, but those aren't addressed at the present time. Other questions? Rick, you've got something?
Well, I want to observe that at some point in the past, when we talked about this, one of the difficulties with bringing it forward, it was the lack of a permanent city manager, because this will affect city processes significantly and staff time and that sort of thing. That's no longer true. We do have a permanent city manager. I believe that one of the steps that ought to be taken is to engage with him on this particular topic.
Rick,
Rick,
I can,
just- Can I?
Want to go ahead?
Tanya, can I ask Rick a question? Just out of curiosity. Rick, what would you see as the specific issues that you would hope the city manager would impart his insight on this issue? What topics or what issues?
Well, I think that the general concept, that's not particularly what I had in mind. It's how would this actually be implemented by city staff? You know, it's a procedural thing that clearly the city manager needs to weigh in on.
Right. When, oh God, why am I blanking on his name? The previous city manager had anticipated that this topic would be included in the council correspondence file as it was being formulated as a piece of new software. At the time, he believed that that would be where it would fit. So at that juncture, at least, it was more about how to get it inserted in that communication package in a way. I don't know whether the city's still engaged in developing a new council communication packet or whether that's already done and passé. I don't have any idea. Tanya, you were going to say something earlier.
yeah, I would be happy to take a draft over and talk with Joe about, getting his feedback on it, if that's helpful. We are going to be starting doing some regular one-on-one or one-on-two counselor discussions with Joe, and I'd be happy to bring that forward. But I do think it does make sense for us to ask him, because what you don't want is for the commission to put something forward that the staff disagrees with. So we want to make sure that we draft it in a way that Joe feels like he can do a good job with it and doesn't have significant reservations about.
Brian, you had a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, Rick, did you think the methodology would be potentially a lot different than, say, what the staff is already having to do with the fiscal note?
I see it as being pretty similar. The difference being that the staff would need to become more conversant with the SEEP inventory to be able to ferret out what the impacts of any particular decision might be. That is the source document in terms of historical emissions, and would seem at least consistent with the draft here to be the required data set, if you will, for documentation. So in some ways it's very similar, but there's dollars and cents are easy to count. Typically, emissions are in some ways a new task and a new science.
Yes, that's my belief, is that this is actually a new process for everybody. Some companies and cities have already integrated into their processes, calculating the climate change impact of what they're doing. And it just requires invention of new things. Hopefully Ashland, by virtue of not being out at the bleeding edge, could clone what cities like, for example, Seattle have done. But in the end, I believe it's a staff process, and I believe taking up Tanya's offer of bringing this forward to Joe and moving forward from there is our best go.
I'd like us to agree to have Tanya follow up with Joe and wait for her report back before we spend much more time here. I think that's a critical step.
I support that. I guess I just had a big picture question on this, which is if anyone could provide background, as to why this climate note is, predominantly focused on goal number 1 in the SEEP to reduce, community greenhouse gas emissions, to the exclusion of goal number 2, which is to prepare the city's community systems and resources to be more resilient to climate change impacts. Because it certainly seems to me like, there could be decisions and programs, infrastructure investments to address resilience as well. And that is something important for council to discover and determine in that decision making.
I know that Tanya's very familiar with resiliency and the issues facing the city in that regard. I wonder, Tanya, if you would be willing to kind of broach that issue with Joe when you talk to him about the climate note and see, how he would see that working in and just kind of integrate it in your discussion, if you would.
Absolutely. I think a big part of what we're trying to do with this is to make it just be part of the process that we consider both adaptation and mitigation in the work that the city does. So I think, it is, it's difficult to count on the carbon side. It's even more difficult to count and to come up with any sort of quantifiable ranking or score or conversation even around the resilience side. But I think that there's a way to do it, and I'd be happy to talk to Joe about that.
Yeah, I feel like we have a plan of action. Did that respond to your request, Caitlin?
Yes, thank you. I think, even if it's hard to quantify, we should still, explore it. So I appreciate that.
Okay, so Bob, you had your hand up, but pretty soon we need to wrap this up.
Yeah, it's just short. I agree with what Caitlin just said and Tanya. But the point I wanted to make going forward is maybe we could also invite Joe to come visit to talk with us at the Climate Policy Commission at a future meeting. get on his agenda. I imagine he's probably got that on his agenda at some point of making around to all the city commission. So, but it'd be nice to be at the front end of that rather than the back end.
Okay, so I feel like we're developing a consensus because I'm not hearing objections to basically having Tanya contact Joe and discuss the various topics that I'm not going to summarize. You've got it, right, Tanya?
I do, but it would be helpful for me to get a Word version of the document because I know we talked about making it say climate note, and it's, you know, I'll probably share some element of this with Joe ahead of my conversation with him. And I'd like to just be able to, you know, tighten up that language before I do.
Okay, well, I don't have it, and Gary dropped off and is coming back. So, but let's just take that as an action. We'll follow up because we need to move on. So, Bob, you're up. Home energy score.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Rick. So you'll recall that at the last CPC meeting in December, we had a discussion of home energy scores, which is really just continued discussion of that item. And I briefed the commission on some early discussions that I and a couple of us that had Tanya and Chris had with some realtors, local realtors in the local realty association. And I asked for the commission's authority to continue those discussions and to explore whether we would like to consider a collaboration with the realtors instead of a mandated policy of requiring home energy scores at the time of listing. We also had brief comments from a person from the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors, Greg Addington, and then I did get that mandate from the commission. After the meeting, I sent around an email to commission members asking for any questions that you thought we should be sure to raise in the subsequent meeting with the realtors, and I didn't get any additional questions. So I took that as a sense that we've got we're doing all the right things, and you're leaving it very much in our hands to think those things through. We did have a meeting with the realtors last week. In fact, exactly a week ago today. Unfortunately, Stu, who was on vacation, was not able to attend that, and Chris was not able to attend either, but Tanya and I were there. It was I would characterize it as a very productive meeting. There were 2 local realtors there. There was the CEO of the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors who was there, and then also Greg Addington, who is pretty much the person who's shepherding this forward for the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors. And we talked about a number of topics, what kind of outcomes we hoped to achieve by a collaboration between the city and the Realty Association. We talked about some of the benefits of that being having a cadre of realtor educators. They like to call themselves educators on this topic, capable of raising both sellers and buyers' awareness of environmental and economic benefits of home energy efficiency. Another outcome that would be a benefit for this collaborative program was that we could actually reach beyond the Ashland city limits to the entire region served by the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors, although the focus certainly would be still on Ashland because that's where we do our work. But a benefit would be that we'd also reach out into Talent and Phoenix and Medford and the outlying areas. And we talked about another beneficial outcome could be that we might generate higher demand for home energy efficiency assessments and build a more robust market for assessors than would be the case if we had a mandate only in the city of Ashland with a relatively limited number of sales that would be required to have the home energy score. So we talked then with those outcomes in mind, we talked about the kinds of elements that there would be in a program, a collaborative program. We talked about one important element would be education for realtors, so that the realtors would have all the tools they need to educate buyers and sellers. And I should say that these elements were very much borrowed from the work that the Realtors did with the Wildfire Safety Commission on risk assessment for fire. That's now part of the part of things that the Realtors discuss with potential buyers when they show them houses. So that's education for Realtors, education for home inspectors or home energy assessors. And there was a comment that in that education, everybody was interested in that those assessors be perceived as independent and not be perceived as in any way conflicted by the fact that they may be selling actual services to the homeowner. We said that it would be important that we integrate the home energy score into the multiple listing service with the intention really of eventually building a home energy efficiency into buyers' expectations for their own due diligence before buying a home. That's something that I stressed quite a bit, and Tanya stressed it to in earlier meetings as well, that we, our dream, to me, success would be that when a homeowner, when a buyer looks at a house, the buyer says, in order to, I need a home energy score just as much as I need a home inspection report before I buy this house. And that will then change the behavior, I think, of sellers, because it'll be part of staging the house for sale. The seller will decide that they want to make sure that their home has as high a home energy score as possible, or is able to do things that make sense to stage the home for sale. And then the last element of the program would be educational materials for the homeowner, including information on city incentive programs, or to the extent that there are incentive programs elsewhere in the valley that other cities might provide, that there'd be information about that. And then we talked about what would we call success? And we talked briefly about both process and outcome indicators. For example, process indicators could be the number of realtors and inspectors trained, could be the number of sellers and buyers educated, could be the number of scores posted on the multiple listing service. That will really tell us whether we're really getting, really coming together on this and making this information available. And then, of course, the outcome indicators are even more important. The actual changes to the equipment or building envelope within maybe 6 months or 12 months before the listing or after the sale. So what is the actual behavior that resulted from the home energy score? Because as you all know, home energy score is just a static number that gives people an assessment of the equipment that's in their house. We talked about potential inputs from the city of Ashland, including any data that may exist from permits issued by the building department to actually track some progress. We talked about the possibility of training a city staff person as a home energy score assessor to support the program. Currently, Dan Cunningham, as you all know, does home energy audits, but he doesn't actually do a home energy score per se. So the idea would be to explore whether that might be one of the things that he would also do. And then we talked about financial incentives for specific energy efficiency improvements that the city might be able to offer. And then finally, we talked about the time frame. What we said is Tanya and I stressed that we were very far advanced developing a mandate to put forward to the city council. And as Greg also affirmed from his conversation with the commission in December, we felt that there were some benefits to doing this as a collaborative program with the Realtors instead. So we wanted to make sure that we recognized that I think the term we used was we were pausing our intention to present something to the city council as a mandatory program. And then we provided mutual assurances, I think, on our side, or on their side, that there would be no foot dragging from the Realtors, and from our side that we wouldn't just come forward and get frustrated too prematurely and then present a mandatory program to the city council, as long as the working group, and Tanya in particular, could assure that there's a good faith effort underway as we develop this. But everybody seemed fully on board with the idea that we need to move quickly. So yesterday, I received a draft program outline from Greg that he actually he said he wanted to get it to me earlier, but he went through the process of getting input from all of the two realtors and the CEO of the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors for a 6-point program. And Rick or Mary, if I am allowed to share, I would like to just, I don't really want to go into detail, but I want to just give you a sense of what it is and just hit the highlights. If I could share my screen, is that okay?
Now, Bob, you just try to orally summarize and we'll keep moving here.
Yep, I can do that. Let's see. That's too bad. Let's see. Okay, I was going to show you a nice outline, but so what we have is a 6-point program. The first point is realtor training and education, and it's going to be a collaborative education program between the City of Ashland, or the Climate Policy Commission, and the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors. And it's important to the realtors that the training be accredited to allow the realtor to use it for continuing education credits. And that the purpose of the training is to train real estate professionals so they can help homeowners, home buyers, and sellers better understand a home's energy use and how even small improvements can make big differences in energy savings. So that's really positioning them to be educators and promoters of the home energy score, and then home energy efficiency investments. The second one is home inspector and energy score expert training. So this is what I mentioned earlier, where there would be training for assessors locally in the valley, probably focusing mostly on people who already offer home inspections or other independent experts who could qualify to be a to do home energy scoring. Then the next step for us on each one of these points is to figure out what the cost would be. So there's a little line underneath that shows the funding costs associated, and we're supposed to be working together to figure that out, and then we'll find out where how we would fund those things. The third item is the Southern Oregon Multiple Listing Services. So the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors will work with this Southern Oregon Multiple Listing Services to create a field in the listing input in the multiple listing services where home energy scores can be recorded by the listing agent. And of course, that's a critical element that it actually gets in there and then gets filled out. And that's something that the association feels that they can do with no cost. So that will be that seems very easy to do, or very possible to do. The fourth is city incentives and financing for home energy improvements. And that's Ashland CPC and city staff will identify incentives and financing options that city residents can use to improve their home energy score. We had talked about specific incentives or the home energy retrofit program as possibilities for that. Preparation of written and digital material and to support all of these things for to be used by the realtors, the city, the public, inspectors, everybody. Rogue Valley Association of Realtors will invest funding options for mass production of materials. That's what happened with the case of the fire risk assessment. And they want materials to be co-branded with the City of Ashland and the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors. Then finally, the sixth item is to measure progress and program adjustments. With this is a fairly thin item. Rogue Valley Association of Realtors and the Ashland CPC will meet regularly to evaluate progress of the program and suggest changes. And I had commented back to Greg that I want to flesh that out a little bit, that we actually identify right now up front before we start the program, the sources of data that would be used to evaluate both process and outcome indicators, and then also the data collection methods, because that's one of the things that, in talking with the fire risk with Steve Gagne about the fire risk assessment, that they are only now going back and figuring out how to evaluate the progress to date. And it seems so collecting that, going back in time to collect that data is more difficult than it would be if we define the data sources and collection methods up front. So that's the six points. I have to say I'm very encouraged by the seriousness. I think this really shows a serious interest in collaboration. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation and fleshing it out and starting to develop materials. One of the things that I had said is that I think that many of the materials and training modules themselves will be relatively easier for home energy scores than it was for fire risk assessments, because there already is support from what is it called, Earth Advantage, as we heard a couple of months ago when two gentlemen came to talk with us, Anthony Roy from Earth Advantage and somebody from Department of Energy. So I'm hopeful that we can actually do this fairly quickly. It seems that we have a substantial meeting of the minds, and we'll see where we go from here. Tanya, you were in the meeting last Tuesday. Did I leave something out, or did I bias my is my optimism not warranted?
No, I think you've hit it right on, Bob, with my reading of the room and where they're at with it. I think we're fortunate that we have realtors in this community that are already committed to climate work and have this is not the only thing that they're looking at and that they've done in terms of their work. So I see that we've got a good, strong partnership started, and I'm heartened by just how quickly they're turning around the proposal. So looks good to me.
Okay. So I'm looking and I'm seeing Gary seems to have a hand up, and Ray has a hand up, and Caitlin has a hand up.
Yeah. Want me to go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
Okay. When we talked, I guess it was back in December, one of the things that I recall the commission being interested in was add on to the home energy score to address greenhouse gas emissions. And I know that that may not be a short-term priority, but I think addressing that as a part of the process would be helpful to the degree that that can happen. As I recall, the folks from the Department of Energy suggested that those additions, that is greenhouse gas emission assessment, would not be difficult to add to the home energy score. And it would, I think, be helpful to advance our cause to have that included.
So just a comment on that. My recollection is slightly different. Yet definitely that we should, there was a lot of interest in adding greenhouse gas emissions to the home energy score. But my recollection of the comment from the Department of Energy official was that that could be done not in the numerical score, but in the add-on text that we would have there. And I know that in talking with Stu about it, he was very, I think, quite interested to make sure that we keep the same, numerical methodology as everybody else, so that we're not some sort of, it just makes it we're not an outlier in that. But yes, adding in those that text down below, there's a line for that, and we certainly should be doing that. We haven't gotten to that level of detail yet about the specific tool, but they do agree that we should be using the home energy score tool. Does that make sense?
Yep, exactly right.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Caitlin?
Thank you. It all sounds very promising and great momentum. On that same note, I know you're not there yet, but I would, further emphasize in the text portion of the report that includes information on, indoor air quality,
Right.
Both as it relates to, indoor air pollution from natural gas appliances, and also, leakages from the home that may allow entry of, noxious smoke and other pollutants from the outdoors. So both of those indoor air quality factors directly relate to improvement recommendations that could come out of the score. So it would be great to see that addressed in the comments section so that potential buyers could review that And then also just a question to clarify, were you saying that what was discussed is not a mandatory program, it would be opt-in?
So that's right. So a collaborative would not be backed by a mandate that all homes would need to have a home energy score before listing. The idea is that this would be achieved instead by the realtors talking with the seller about the advantages of that, and certainly also talking with the buyer about the advantages of that, so that we would achieve greater buy-in over time by changing people's expectations of what kind of information they would require in order to buy a house. Much like a home inspection is today, it's not a required activity. Certainly, a bank might be more interested in financing a house that's purchased based on the home inspection, but it's not required. But certainly, most people choose to have that done as part of their own due diligence. So that's the idea.
Yeah. Well, I thought, at one point in one of our prior meetings when we discussed this topic, I can't remember who, but someone commented to the effect that if it's not mandatory, it's really not very effective. And I think about people, say, who aren't buying homes, renters who'd want to review this information and don't have the power to order this report. And I would advocate that it be mandatory, or that it move in that direction, or that if we don't reach a certain threshold voluntarily, a mandate comes into place. That's just my 2 cents.
So with respect to renters, this would not apply. Even the mandatory programs don't apply to renters. They're only mandates at the time of listing of a home for sale.
Well, right now I'm saying, like, renters, if a home is recently sold, a renter could go and see that report and understand that, the more, if it's mandated, as homes turn over and sell, this information will become available for more and more homes, I'm saying.
Yeah, that could be that. And then the comment that you mentioned, that was again, the person's name I can't recall, from the Department of Energy, made the comment that he strongly favors mandatory programs because, in his view, voluntary programs don't get the uptake that they require. I think the way I'm looking at it here is that this is not a voluntary program, in the way that a voluntary program, an optional program might be. This is one that's heavily promoted by our realtor collaborators, and so that you would get better uptake. But absolutely, the point you made about following through with a mandate if we're not getting the uptake that we expect, that's very clear. That was one of the first topics that we discussed with the realtors when we first started discussing, is that if we don't hit if we're just not getting home energy scores generated, and that's why it's important to actually have track that number as we go, through it, so that we can then, City Council can put in a mandate if we're not getting those numbers. So absolutely.
Did you establish a specific threshold for uptake?
We haven't defined that yet.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I know Ray had, and now I see Andra has her hand up.
Yeah, I'm just following up on what Caitlin raised, whether or not we need to have a vote, whether this program is mandatory, collaborative, or initially collaborative, and measurements to determine if it needs to become mandatory.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be important, because I got the sense that that's why I asked for the Commission's direction at the last meeting about whether to go forward with a collaborative program. And I thought I got the Commission's decision that it should be voluntary. But absolutely, we should have a vote on that right now, because I don't want to waste people's time. If the sense of the Commission is that this should be a mandatory program, then I would just tell the realtors, thanks for all the good conversation and thanks for all the good work, but we can't really we want to go a different direction. So I would definitely want some very clear direction from this commission that we can that I can take back. So Rick, are you jumping in, or do you want me to continue?
Yeah, I
follow
do
the
want to
order?
jump in because I feel that in December, you were given that by consensus that we are going to give the voluntary program a go, and that you would go and talk to these folks and come back with strong guarantees that there would be no foot traffic. What I'm hearing so far is that everything's going according to the plan that we set in December. So I'm a little disturbed that we would be starting to consider reversing that position.
Well, Rick, I think I brought it up because I heard that Bob say that there is an option that he discussed with them. If things are slow, it could become mandatory.
Correct, which I believe is what we said in December as well, that we would.
Okay, well, I
need to
guess I wanted to
reserve.
clarify that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and so yes, that is my view, that we would start out as a collaborative program that would not be backed by a city mandate, but that if we find that uptake is, if we find either foot dragging, vaguely defined, but and that was certainly that was certainly a topic of discussion in our meeting last week. If we find foot dragging, so we don't even get to the starting point, or we find as we roll out the program and there's not the kind of uptake that we would expect, then the city council, we would always have the possibility of putting in a mandatory program. But we have not gotten to the level of trying to define what would be the uptake of home energy scores posted on the multiple listing service that would satisfy our expectations that this is enough progress. I don't know Caitlin or for others want to offer some opinions on that or some suggestions on how the work group, Tanya, Chris, and I take that up with the realtors, because we are certainly going to have that conversation. And so
Well,
if you
I
wanna
think
weigh
it's
in on that,
early,
that'd be-
and but just that they're aware that that is an option.
they're very aware.
And I think we have time to develop, see how it goes. We don't need to address that now, but just make them aware that that is an option if things go slow.
Okay.
And we'll have to define what that means.
Yes, I think it's important to have that clearly defined from the get-go so that, you know, everyone's on the same page. And, you know, I would think if the goal is 100% uptake, then, you know, the bar should be fairly high. Even if there's a phase-in period, you know, eventually we'd want to get to a point of, I think, at least 90%, you know, in order for it to be effective.
There was some question that was raised by the group about what the actual level of home energy score reporting is achieved in those jurisdictions that have mandated it. That there is a sense, anecdotal, and we'd have to explore this, that people, certain sellers have decided to pay the fine rather than actually go through the process. I would say I think we'd at least want to be informed by that experience before setting a goal that may not even be achieved with mandatory programs. Does that make sense, Caitlin?
It does. Yeah, I guess just in general, I'm saying, you know, set the bar high but reasonable.
Agreed. Andre, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think that from what I heard, it sounds like there's it's a kind of a double opportunity here to institute the program, but also do some public awareness that with the whole community, that the realtors would be engaged with in a very positive way. And that seems like even a better sort of bang for our buck, if you will. I do wonder what exactly is the resistance to having it mandatory just a requirement? And maybe we shouldn't even use the word mandatory. That sounds so onerous, but a requirement of selling a house that it has an energy score. This is just a requirement, like, you know, there's no lead in the building, or, you know, other kinds of requirements that are. What is the resistance to that in the realtor community? Do you have a sense of that?
I do, and maybe Chris or Tanya might want to weigh in on this at all as well. I guess my sense was first that there were some statements that yeah, they find that the lack of compliance in markets like I just mentioned, where there's hot real estate market and sellers are not doing it anyway, and also that there's a resentment and resistance to the whole program when it is mandated like that, so that there's even those who do comply don't necessarily take it on board and say, well, this is something that is really important. And both the realtors and the sellers would not treat this requirement as seriously as they would if it were the product of that sort of education and consciousness raise that you mentioned, Audra. I think there's also a concern about time, but that I think the Earth Advantage folks commented that in fact most of these scores can get done in a couple of days. You can get, if you have a market of inspectors, but that still comes up. I think those are the principal things. Tanya or Chris, did you have other things that the realtors expressed?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tanya.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say the way I think I approached it was really looking at a opportunity, one, for a database. I think, as Caitlin mentioned, just really creating as much of a body of data as possible here across the city home inventory, and two, as an on-ramp really into the incentives offered by the city for energy efficiency in the homes, and really providing, I think, those that need those incentives most with that opportunity. So that was, I think, the enforcement or the mandate sometimes can create more resistance than cooperation. And I think I feel like if anything, maybe we give it a year. I think that's a valid time frame to see like what the buy-in is. And I have seen, a lot of work homes moved in the city here. There's a lot that goes pretty quickly there.
Yeah, Chris, you faded out a little bit, so I'm not sure we heard your entire last sentence.
I was just saying the amount of inventory turnover in Ashland, specifically in real estate, is such that I think we should see good progress in a year. I think that's a good kind of milestone for us in this.
Great. Okay. Tanya, did you want to say anything more about that topic?
Yeah, I think sometimes opposition comes just from the notion of something being mandated, and then the content doesn't, becomes a secondary consideration. But people they consider that they're serving their client, and they have a variety of tools by which they can serve that client. But it's there's already a fair amount of must-haves in any sort of real estate transaction, and so their opinion is that if the realtors have actually bought into it and they see this as a benefit to their clients, will get farther along with it than if it's something that's just sort of perfunctory and just done and not really talked about with the clients as they come through. So I think it's right. I would agree entirely, Caitlin, that we need to have a benchmark, and we need to be evaluating it, and we need to make sure that our partners know that what matters to us is that it gets taken up and it gets used in these transactions. And so if we can get there by the realtors partnering with us and really taking this on, then that's a fantastic way, and it actually reaches out past the boundaries of Ashland. So it seems like it's worth a good shot to me.
Thanks, Tanya. Brian, you have a comment?
Yeah, I think I agree with Chris that we give it a certain amount of time, and I agree with the idea of it being voluntary, but going back to the realtors and saying it's voluntary, but we would like to see some number, say 85 or 90%, and that explicitly in March or April of 2023, we're going to do a survey of all listings and see how many of them have a score.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's right, and that's actually one of the reasons why I was insisting on indicators and the data collection method up front. I would hope that we would have those numbers on that compliance rate or that listing rate, even month to month. I wouldn't have to wait until till after a year. Absolutely. Gary, you had a comment?
Yeah, Bob, I just asked that you bring back a recommendation to us in the coming months as to what that threshold might be, based upon, experience in other communities and, the rate of pickup, all of those things, whatever. But in any event, bring back to the commission a recommendation.
Great. Thanks, Gary. That's helpful. Anything else? Or have we covered everything? Any other questions, comments? Okay. Rick, I'm turning it back to you. If I can.
Very good. Thank you, Bob. It's after 6 o'clock, and so it's quite clear we're not going to march through all of the work plan and commissioner roles and all that. But before we even get to the abbreviated version of that, there's a topic, the selection of topic for council study session. I don't know that there's, I just want to recapitulate where I understand that we are and see if there's general agreement and comment. And so I hope it doesn't even take 10 minutes. So given that we've chosen to go forward with the collaboration with the Realtors, I think we agreed in December that we were not going to bring the home energy score material to the council anytime soon, but rather we would explore the way this is going. And so I'm just ticking off the 4 policy proposals that have been on the table for some time now. And so the home energy score one is not really in play right at the moment. There's the fossil gas phase out across the whole community that Ray has been producing an outline and that sort of thing for. He and I still, in December, I acknowledged that I simply would not have time to work with Ray on producing something for this meeting. It is my hope to produce something for the February meeting, but I don't feel like we're at the point where we're ready to start creating a presentation to go to council on that one either. So that leaves what's been called the carbon note. We're starting to call it the climate note or something else entirely. And the city infrastructure, gas infrastructure procurement. Those 2 are still there. I think we have identified how we're going to have Tanya go forward on the climate note one. And so that really just leaves the infrastructure procurement one that you have now been assigned to start creating a presentation for. So to me, there's not really any choice to make. We're pretty much down to one thing that I feel we're ready to start moving forward towards a council study session. And so I just want to see if the commission as a whole acknowledges that that is the reality that we're at. And I would want to propose that we say that we will be ready to make a presentation in March on that topic. So with that, I'd then like to hear what the commission thinks about it. Bob?
I follow your logic and I think it's impeccable. I guess I wonder whether would be some benefit because we talked about having possibility of a couple of topics at a study session, that maybe just reporting because home energy scores was something that you raised as a possibility with the mayor, and I recall that you thought you heard, I think she said that that was her top priority. So just to let it not be sense that we dropped it, but that in fact are proceeding in a different way. We could even give maybe a 5-minute synopsis or something that doesn't require council approval, so therefore not subject of a full study session.
Yeah, let me just respond to that. My intent is to always set context for the council, and that is probably going to take for what's essentially going to be our first go at this, a significant amount of time. I'm guessing 15, 20 minutes just to set context. And then the rest of the time would be devoted to the specific topic.
Okay.
Okay.
Rick, I think going forward, that is okay with me. I think it's good also to gauge the council feedback on bringing the other topics. So I think it'll be a good test case.
Okay, any other comments or questions? If not, then that's the plan that we're going to adopt by consensus, is to move forward with the procurement issue, and Gary and I will start putting a presentation together. So if that is the sense of the commission, then Tanya, I think we're at the point where we need to start scheduling a council study session. So if you can move that forward, that would be great.
Yeah, and if you maybe we just need to I just need to know what is the what documentation do you want to send forward? Is what was in the packet this time, or is there something else?
Oh, no, we're not ready
Right.
to actually do
I didn't
that
think
yet.
so, but I need to give some sort of paragraph description in my request.
I propose that Gary and I get back to you hopefully within the week
Okay.
with that short paragraph that we would propose to you.
Perfect.
Okay. Any other comments or questions or objections to that plan? Gary?
This is a question for Tanya. Do you think there's, it's plausible that once you talk to the city manager that we could include the climate note in that study session? I know, Rick, you had expressed a desire to only have one topic, but I know too that getting study sessions with the council are going to be very precious, and we, I think, need to maximize our opportunity.
Well, my recommendation is that between context setting and the procurement issue, that will largely fill up an entire session, that we shouldn't try to stretch that far. But obviously, this is a question that the whole commission needs to decide as a body. And obviously, it will also affect what Gary and I go do in developing this presentation. Anyway, what do you all want us to do?
Well, I think it is true that the study sessions are not easily come by. So we want to make the very best use of it. We also don't want to have something left dangling. So we've had study sessions where the conversation doesn't complete, and then it's just kind of left without really, direction hasn't been given, and then it's going to be however long before we can have that opportunity again. So what I think makes sense to do is to prioritize what goes on, but maybe the background information that is sent in the packet to the council includes a couple of different options, but we decide that the most important thing is one element, and that we need to get council direction back on that particular element, so that we don't leave that conversation until we have what we need, and then we spend the rest of the time as we have it available to answer questions about other things that are in the packet, but not to go into as much depth. We can always invite the council to reach out to Rick and share any thoughts if there isn't time in the study session on those other elements, but at least at that point, then you will have opened up the conversation with the council on those other topics, like the climate note. But I think you want to make sure that you don't think, oh, we have to move on to the next agenda item because we're a certain distance into the meeting. You want to get all the way through with the most important thing that you're there to talk to the council about.
Okay, well, so what I'm hearing is that we might need to, this all depends on how the conversation goes with Joe, because we may learn a lot. But if that came out very positive and he was very supportive and all that sort of stuff, then Gary and I would be sure that there was the slides in the deck and in the memo that goes in the packet that would support addressing the climate note as well. And I'm fine with that, as long as it's quite clear that could just fall off the end of the meeting, and we just don't have time to get to it. Oh, and I also want to note that I believe that the entire burden of producing the memo, which normally staff would do most of it, is going to have to fall on us to do it, because we don't have the staff in place to prepare that memo. At most, it'll just be a very short paragraph by staff saying, here it is. That's my understanding of how this has to go forward.
I think that makes sense. It's going to be a while before we have the position filled.
Okay, so Gary, you're the only one that commented on changing the consensus decision that I was enunciating. Are you okay with my variation on that?
Yes.
Okay, then we'll take that as and go do the work. Okay, it is now 6:15, and so rather than trying to do the more expansive work that I had anticipated tonight, I would just want to make a couple of comments and ask a couple of questions, and then if there's other commentary, give the rest of the commission a chance to speak, and then we'll probably call it a night. I put in the packet the look ahead and the plan that we put forward to council last September. A couple of months ago, I had intentionally gone through what we said we were going to do in the plan and updated the look ahead to have at least a for each one of the commitments that we made. And so, assuming that I didn't make any errors, the look ahead should be sufficient to have a discussion about everything we said we were going to do. As you will note, the updated look ahead has a number of question marks for the lead. This is due to commission turnover. So we've had commissioners leave, and fortunately we have had more arrive, and so as I think I indicated last month, I think it's a good time partway through the year to review who's doing what. So the last comment that I want to make and a question I want to pose is that out of all of these, the one that has some momentum right now, because a number of community members have contacted the council about leaf blowers, and the tenor of their emails is that they not only want to complain, but they want to do something about it. And so I forwarded those emails to a less than quorum set of commissioners. And I specifically made this suggestion that Caitlin might want to work with Gary moving this forward, because he is the one identified as the lead right now. Obviously, Gary's been doing a lot of other work. But I haven't heard back from Gary, so I guess I'd like to give you the first opportunity to speak, Gary, about what your thoughts are with respect to that specific project.
Oh, I think Caitlin and I would be delighted to work on it. Caitlin called this afternoon, so we had a chance to kind of share our insights and passions about this topic. So I think we're ready to move forward. I anticipate that sometime early next week or so, I'll be able to compile all the various background information that we've, as a CPC, have generated over roughly the last year or so. And I hope Caitlin and I can then come back to the CPC with a recommendation of how to move forward.
Sounds great. Anybody else want to comment on that? Bob?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Yeah, no, that sounds great to me too. I just want to recall that this is something that we approved in the CPC. We approved a strategy, I guess now going almost 2 years ago. And the first element of that strategy was to work with the Parks Department so that we can, much as we discussed with the electrification of Ashland City buildings, that the city would be in a position of talking what it's already walking and doing. And in fact, the Parks Department has made some substantial progress in electrification. And we had put out that they would be collecting data. And I don't know, Gary, whether in your conversations with Parks Department people, they took that to heart and were gathering data on costs and impacts of electrifying their lawnmowers and their leaf blowers and everything like that. But that would be very useful to have those data in order to then expand out and be able to present actual experience with numbers, with impacts to the lawn care companies and start to expand that discussion.
Yeah, it was gratifying that the Parks Commission basically committed to that inventory as a part of their goal setting session. So, and furthermore, as I have been told, the Parks Department have bought 3 large electric powered mowers, which they are delighted with and are proud to show off.
And hopefully they're also tracking cost numbers so that they can actually show the reduction in operating costs to go with the increased cost of acquisition.
I have to admit, I'm not familiar with that cost analysis part of it. I only understood that they were looking at their basically an inventory of production of greenhouse gas production, but I am reasonably confident of their administrative skill and competence and interest in controlling costs and minimizing expenditures. So I wouldn't be surprised if, in fact, that detail's there.
Okay. Sounds like there's a plan for Caitlin and Gary to go forth, and I will assume that you would like to say where you are at the meeting in February, unless you tell me that you're not going to be ready. And beyond that, I don't know that there's much more useful for me to do, because I don't want to start a discussion with the 8 minutes that are left and then just have to cut it off. Ray?
Well, Rick, I think you did a nice job reorganizing the look ahead. I would just suggest that I saw a few things I could put my name on, and if any of the other commissioners feel the same way, that we let you know so you can fill it out for the next meeting
That would be great.
and see where the gaps are.
Yep.
I would also say that EV land use planning will, at least based upon the draft Land Conservation and Development Commission climate friendly rulemaking, probably be addressed and ostensibly solved through that rulemaking process. So I think that one's going to be taken off our chart, at least in terms of a baseline standard. We may find that we want more than what the state's requiring of local government, but at least as a baseline, that rule will provide that fact or that threshold.
Yay! I'm excited every time there's less for us to do. Okay. Unless somebody else has something more to say, I think that the consensus is that people should get back to me to help me fill in the question marks. This will be brought back again. It's always my intent to have this level of planning to be towards the end of the meeting because making progress on the things we've already identified is, I believe, the consensus position of the commission that's more important than winding our way through these things. Okay, anything else? Not seeing anything. We can all eat dinner, or I can go eat dinner at 5 minutes early. Okay. Thank you all. Very productive meeting. I failed to note at the beginning that Brian has joined us because it seems like he's always been around. But thank you, Brian, for being here. Good night. We're adjourned.